I don't need to tell you that the last few years have been quite challenging for Dwayne Johnson. A series of blockbuster box office failures, coupled with controversies surrounding his social media persona, have shaken his image. Constantly changing his stance in response to negative reactions has eroded his reputation as the king of Hollywood action movies, turning him into a declining star with a rather uncertain future. But as I've said before, The Rock's strength lies in his keen ability to recognize when public opinion turns against him and quickly adjust his strategy. One of the biggest criticisms leveled against him is that he plays the same type of character in every film: big, friendly, charismatic, always doing the right thing, almost a copy-paste of himself in real life. To break free from that cycle, he needs to prove he can do more. That's why The Smashing Machine came along, where he plays a muscular but drug-addicted athlete with a troubled personal life, gradually falling into crisis after a major career setback. Ignoring the irony, this is clearly a different approach, a more gritty, realistic sports biopic rather than The Rock's usual pop-up, family-friendly style. It's like an opportunity for him to prove he can act in a drama, not just rely on his muscles and catchy lines. So, was the film really successful? The answer is okay. Certainly not good enough to compete for an Oscar. The script is sometimes disjointed, lacking focus, and the ending doesn't deliver the same emotional impact as the story built earlier. But having said that, it's not a bad film. It might even be one of the best films he's ever been in. Though that's not a very high standard, it's still worth noting. Set in the early days of MMA in the late 1990s, the film centers around Mark Kerr, a young talent with exceptional strength. On the outside, he's gentle and likable, but behind the glamour lies a life full of problems, drug addiction, and a tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend. When he suffers his first major defeat in Japan, the shock plunges him into depression and drug abuse, leading to a drug overdose and hospitalization. That's the bottom of his life, where everything begins to fall apart. Damn. I didn't mean to play on words like that. But like any sports biopic, Mark Kerr begins his journey of recovery with support from his close friend and fellow fighter Mark Coleman. He gave up drugs, returned to serious training, and regained his form just in time for the 2000 Grand Prix. The question was, could Mark reach the final and reclaim glory, or would this Cinderella story end in a completely different way? Choosing Dwayne Johnson for this role was a gamble from the start. Not only because of the baggage he carried as a star, his big ego, his familiar image, but also because of the biggest doubt: was he capable of handling the emotionally heavy scenes? After watching it, the answer is yes, but not entirely. There are times when it's clear he's forcing the emotions, trying to project them when they aren't truly there inside. And certainly this isn't an Oscar-worthy performance. But to be fair, this film proved that behind the muscular exterior and oversized image, there is still an actor who can do the job, if placed in the right role. The confrontation scenes with Dawn felt incredibly real. The moments when anger erupted into violence were raw and unsettling in a positive way. He particularly excelled at portraying someone constantly suppressing his inner rage, a man capable of inflicting devastating damage in the ring, yet terrified of doing so in real life. This internal conflict was quite evident. He also had good chemistry with Emily Blunt, who was almost completely transformed by heavy makeup and a different hairstyle, but still maintained her usual solid acting. The fight scenes were flawless, realistic, short, rough, and sometimes quite ugly, typical of early MMA. There were no flashy or exaggerated choreography like many other Hollywood films. The fighting was mainly grappling, close combat, and violent ground and pound. It's said Dwayne Johnson even took real blows to increase the realism, which is admirable, as these fighters certainly don't hold back. However, despite the decent acting and technique, the film's biggest weakness remains the script. It lacks focus, is rambling, and spends time on segments that don't contribute much to the story or character development. The relationship between Mark and Dawn also lacks a clear development path to truly elevate the narrative. And to be frank, this is what drags the film down the most. The problem is that the script seems unsure whether Dawn is a positive or negative influence on Mark Kerr's life. This leads to a rather anticlimactic ending, lacking a climax, making it difficult for viewers to grasp the film's intended message. Perhaps the main point the film aims for is inner satisfaction and peace don't just come from external achievements or victories. This isn't a bad message, but the way the film leads to that conclusion is rather vague and unconvincing. Combining all these weaknesses, we have a somewhat drawn-out experience, lacking explosive moments and feeling longer than its actual running time. A film that relies heavily on realistic fight scenes and a cast trying their best to carry a rather uninspired script. It's hard to believe, but this time, Dwayne Johnson deserved a better script. However, The Smashing Machine can't be called a disaster. On the contrary, it at least proves that The Rock can do more than just rely on his familiar overweight image. If you're interested in MMA, especially its early stages, the film still has enough elements to keep you watching. It wasn't an overwhelming knockout victory, but rather a points win. But it was still a necessary step forward for Dwayne Johnson nonetheless. That's it. Go check it out if you're curious.